And we are thrilled to have Heather York with us today as our expert presenter. Heather's been working in occupational therapy since 2000. She's also a certified handwriting specialist with Learning Without Tears. And we are thrilled that today she has really taken the approach of bringing us a lot of practical hands-on examples and data of things that parents and teachers can do to help students who may be struggling with their handwriting. So with that introduction, we really appreciate having you here today, Heather. Thank you for joining us. And
Thank
I will turn it
you.
over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Jennifer, for the introduction and inviting me here. And thank you for everyone joining us tonight. I'm really excited, and I'm eager to discuss handwriting with y'all. You're gonna hear y'all a lot. I'm from Texas. We're gonna discuss why handwriting is so important, what is going on, and what can we do about the problems that we're seeing. I've seen so much concern and anxiety and panic from parents about how their children are doing in regards to handwriting. And if this webinar helps ease a little of that worry and not just offer hope, but like tangible, practical information, then I think this will be time really well spent. I'm going to try to demonstrate as much as I can. So instead of like having a PowerPoint, I attach that outline or that agenda for y'all to follow, take notes on it, write down some questions. I want to delve in, but we will leave time for questions at the end. And there is a lot to talk about. So I've been a handwriting specialist for over a decade with Handwriting Without Tears, which is now Learning Without Tears. And I've worked with a lot of different programs. And one thing remains the same is that there are still so many kids with handwriting difficulties. And for every child, there is a parent or a teacher concerned about their performance. Chances are you're here because you've noticed that something doesn't look quite right with your children's handwriting. You might be getting emails or notes on their worksheets from the teachers commenting on their handwriting, or you might be getting back like their weekly folder and there's actually no comment on the handwriting specifically, but you can't read what they wrote. It's not uncommon that your child will still be doing well in class, but you're struggling to understand what they wrote. Sometimes they're struggling to see what they wrote. Maybe the information that they're writing is correct, but because the handwriting is so illegible, it's too hard to even assess the content of what they're writing. Or maybe your child understands how to add large numbers, right? But because they can't line them up correctly due to spacing or sizing, they're actually doing the math wrong. Maybe it's a journal entry and you can't read it because there's no spacing between the words and the letters are literally written on top of each other. Or maybe the handwriting looks correct or it's really legible, but you notice that your child is fixated on making it perfect or erasing too much or getting really, really frustrated. Maybe they have a really uncomfortable looking grip and their hand is constantly getting tired, or they complain that their hand hurts, or maybe it's all the combined, right? All the above. And it's important to assess and correct the problem because when a child struggles with handwriting, they spend their energy and attention on the like physical motor processes of writing instead of thinking creatively or developing their ideas. And poor handwriting can result in like less length and quality of their content. And when you have good handwriting or handwriting fluency, you can develop writing fluency. And that's the goal of this, right? We just want our kids to have legible, fluent, automatic writing for extended periods of time. Okay, so why is handwriting still so important? With everything so technologically based these days, why do we really need to write? And you're not wrong to ask that question because so much of what we do on an everyday basis is through technology. We write emails, we type our papers, we text, we use our phones. And yes, in reality, as adults, we do rely on technology versus handwriting. But there is a need to learn how to physically write. You'll have forms to fill out. Kids have standardized tests that have to be handwritten. You need to develop a signature I work a lot on signature. Maybe you're a person who loves to journal, but most importantly, there have been multiple studies about the link between the physical act of writing and how it affects memory, recognition of letters and numbers, spelling, reading, just overall integration of information in the brain. And that's just something that keyboarding doesn't do in the same way. My own kids are a junior and freshman in college now, and they both use laptops in middle school and high school. And they took notes on it. They took their exams on it, the annotated notes, all that stuff. And both now take notes in college completely differently. They either write out what they want to retain during the lecture, or they record the lecture on their phones and then later rewrite the notes on paper, because getting the grades in college is really tough. And they've both figured out on their own, without their mama nagging at them, that writing the material helps them retain it. So it's exceptionally important to give our kids the best foundation of good handwriting so that they could have good spelling, good reading and writing skills, less frustration, opportunities to build self-esteem, and to have efficient learning. And, most importantly, a love of learning. So now I just want to talk briefly, really quickly, especially to you parents out there that have kids in like 2nd to 4th grade or current elementary. First, I want you to know that you are not alone. I have never been contacted by so many parents needing help for their kids or teachers asking for guidance for their students than I have over these past few years. Like I said, my kids are in college now. So when COVID hit, I wasn't worried about their learning loss or their retention because they were in high school. As a parent, I was more worried about like social isolation, depression, being separated from friends and family. But my friends who had younger kids who were just starting school, like kindergarten, 1st and 2nd, when COVID interfered with school for them, it was an entirely different ballgame. So I just want to talk really briefly about the attainment gap and then learning loss from what I call the COVID pause and how that affected handwriting. So cancellation of in-class instruction set an unprecedented disruption in children's education, specifically in writing. For some kids, they regressed from what they knew, and others literally stopped learning these skills. Studies are just now being published about how much was lost or delayed. And there's a lot of variables that play into this, but the overall consensus is that kids lost anywhere from about 4.5 to 18 months. And I know that's a wide range, but the point is that virtually no child came out of the pandemic without some loss or delay in learning. And for those kids that were in just in the beginning, like just started school, where you really learn those foundational skills, they're now having to play catch up at this accelerated rate. And they're really struggling with getting the work out. And you know that, right? Like I didn't need to tell you about a study in the UK saying that your kids are struggling because of COVID. Handwriting is a skill that requires practice, daily practice. And in order to become a fluent writer, handwriting must be a habit. So it's no shocker that their school disruption caused a negative effect on how they learned handwriting. So let's talk about, how do kids learn handwriting skills? How do they learn to write? So here we go. Handwriting is the integration of perceptual motor skills, cognitive skills, and kinesthetic skills. All that basically means is that handwriting is the combination of being able to see and remember the formation of letters, hold a pencil correctly, hold the paper correctly, and sit correctly, right? It's a skill that requires visual spatial skills, visual motor skills, visual memory skills. Kids need to be able to use their hands, or at least adapt the use of their hands. They need to be able to hear and see a demonstration. They need sight and sound memory. They need to be able to attend to a task. And, most importantly, handwriting is a skill that has to be explicitly taught. Teachers must model the formation of letters and numbers in order for kids to be able to write them correctly. And kids need to have multiple opportunities to practice in the most beneficial way for that child. So let me explain it to you this way. I'm sure you've taken those learning aptitude tests where you answer a bunch of questions and then it tells you how what kind of learner you are. You're either a auditory learner or visual learner or tactile learner, kinesthetic learner. Okay, you know what you are, right? There's multiple ways of learning information, and handwriting is a multi-sensory motoric cognitive skill. Now, imagine that you're an auditory learner, but you're only given a worksheet to copy. Or imagine that you're a visual learner and you don't have enough visual representation, or the writing on the whiteboard is, too far away and you sit and you can't see it. Our poor tactile and kinesthetic learners, they just, they need to touch and feel and do to learn. And oftentimes there just aren't enough methods or materials provided to teachers to give our kids the opportunity to learn that way. And understand, this is absolutely not an attack on our teachers, okay? Our teachers are tasked with the impossible sometimes and might only have a portion of the materials or time they wish they had for their class. So I want to make it clear that this is not meant to sound like an attack on your child's teacher when you see illegible handwriting from your child. There's just so much that goes into handwriting, and there could be one or more factor at play. And it's not just that their teacher isn't teaching them. Okay. But at the end of the day, children must be explicitly taught handwriting in a manner that complements their learning style. We need our kids to hear the description of how to form the letters using consistent language. They need to see representation of the letters on multiple planes, right? And in multiple sizes. They need to feel the difference between a long line or a short line. They need music. They might need a silly story with the writing. They need age appropriate materials. They need to be given the opportunity to practice every day. When I work with kids, typically it's once a week for like a half an hour. And so I tell them, you got to practice every day, 5 minutes, but every day. Because if we want to see changes in their handwriting, it has to become a habit. And it's always easier to start a good habit versus breaking a bad habit, right? Okay. So now I want to shift the conversation to what I call the 3 pillars of handwriting, or 3 facets of handwriting, 3 parts, right? Okay. Handwriting instruction, which I just briefly mentioned, pencil grip and fine motor skills, and then the physical setup or gross motor skills. So let's start with handwriting instruction. So we just talked about that handwriting has to be specifically taught and modeled for your child. Now there's so many great programs and workbooks and printed materials out there that they all have great instruction worked into them. They've got great visual representation, lots of examples, but those materials are merely a tool that needs to complement the demonstration, the modeling, not just what the instruction is based on. For example, I love looking at recipes online. It's what I love to do, right? But my favorite recipes are the ones that have a video attached to them where they're actually sort of demonstrating how to make it. It's not just me reading the actual ingredients and how it's made. It's the same concept. Your child needs to see the capital letter R or the number 4 or the lowercase g. Oh, that lowercase g, right? Oh, they need to see it demonstrated for them. It's really important that the language they learn is consistent. I've heard like stick, ball, circle, line. I mean, I've heard a lot of different terminology. I have my personal favorites, but what's most important is that it's consistent. You just don't want to jump from line to stick or ball to circle, right? Just keep it simple and consistent. Now, the order of which we learn letters first varies from program to program as well. I'm a huge fan of learning capital letters first for our younger kids. They are all the same size. They all start at the top. They all sit on the baseline. They're all the coordination of the same strokes. They're easy to read and recognize, you know, like most street signs, exit signs, stop signs, they're almost all in capital letters. Capitals should then also be grouped in small and similar strokes, just not alphabetical. So I don't start with the capital letter A. I start with capital letter F. Then I move to E, because F is just the intersection of a big and a few little lines. And then you move to E because it's just one more line, right? Let me show you this one. When you learn how to write the capital letter D, it's very similar to P, which is extremely similar to B. So, and so on and so on, right? The point is basically by grouping letters of similar strokes, you help reinforce those skills. Once you master capital letters, then I move on to the lowercase letters. With lowercase letters, the same holds true, right? We want to group our lowercase letters in similar strokes. So let me show you these. The C is very similar to the A, which is very similar to the G, and so on, and D and things like that. Let me show you one more. Again, not alphabetical, similar strokes, right? Lowercase r, very similar to lowercase n, which is very similar to lowercase m, right? You get it, right? Numbers are the only thing that I really believe have to be taught in numerical order. You just don't want to confuse your child by teaching them how to write numbers in anything other than numerical order, because they have a value to them, right? Okay, so you're not going to want to teach them how to write 7 before 3, but numbers are very, very similar to capital letters in the fact that they all take up the same amount of space. They start at the top, they stop at the baseline. There obviously errors can happen with numbers. A lot of times it's mostly reversals. There's a lot of reversals with numbers, and the sizing can be too big. But again, with modeling and specific instruction, multi-sensory tools, they usually work it out. I'm so sorry. All of a sudden my computer went, you're running out of power. And I don't know how that's possible because I'm plugged in. 1 second. I'm so sorry about this. Let me make sure my computer is plugged in. That is crazy. That is crazy. Hold on 1 second. I'm so sorry. Let me just make sure all is good, because the last thing y'all want is for me not to have power. Hold on. There we go. Now I got power. 2 seconds, 2 seconds. I apologize. And we're back in business. Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know why that just happened. It's plugged in. Okay. Technical glitches. That's why I like to handwrite. All right. Okay. So now we're talking about sort of the multi-sensory materials. Once you sort of show them the demonstration, you're teaching them, we want to move on to multi-sensory materials that we want our kids to use. I recommend using wood pieces, plastic pieces. You can cut out little foam shapes, rolling Play-Doh to build letters, placing sandpaper under paper, and then you can finger trace the letters. You can color letters. You can use chalk. There's so many different materials and techniques that we can use. I want to go into that in a little bit, because when we start talking about how do we fix all these problems, I feel like those methods really come into play. So let's put a pin in that for a sec, but I promise we're going to come back to it. Okay. So first, handwriting has to be taught, period. 2, the grip. Now I could legitimately spend an entire hour talking about pencil grip. And typically I get the most questions and concerns about pencil grip from parents. I mean, it's a big deal. Right? Okay. Much like handwriting, learning how to hold a pencil, pen, or crayon correctly has to be taught or demonstrated. And learning how to hold a writing utensil, it's very similar to learning how to hold a feeding utensil. So when your babies were young and were learning how to feed themselves, they started with finger foods, right? They started with Cheerios. Remember how they would grasp the Cheerios, right, with the side of their hands? And then it would evolve into picking up the Cheerios with that cute little pincher. Oh, they were so cute, right? Their little pins, that's your pincer, you're pinching, right? Eventually, in time, that grasp evolves into something that's needed for a tripod grip, which is a really functional, healthy grip. When you're trying to teach them how to eat with a spoon or a fork, you give them cute little spoons and cute little forks, and then you put them in their hand and you guide them how to do it correctly. You don't give them the serving spoon. You don't give them the serving fork, right? You give them size appropriate utensils. Same thing holds true for learning how to hold a pencil correctly, right? You give them little crayons, little pencils. We don't give them tools that are this big, right? Now, I recognize that there is a whole market out there of ginormous jumbo pencils and those massive jumbo crayons. And for some students, they are appropriate. But honestly, I find that the smaller and more size appropriate writing tool, the better the grip. I use golf pencils. I use small crayons. I'll take a brand new box of crayons and break them in half. I mean, that's what we do, right? But it's okay because they need those smaller sized utensils for their little hands. And I just love crayons. Crayons have a lot of drag and resistance and like sensory feedback. Kids really do get a chance to strengthen their grip when they're coloring. We also want to give them an opportunity to build grip strength with things like Play-Doh and clay and that weird kinetic sand and making cookies, whatever you can give them. When your kids were babies, you gave them opportunities to crawl and play with toys and build blocks and all the fun things that kids do to develop gross and fine motor skills. All of those activities help provide the framework and the foundation for the fine motor skills they need in school. And I'm sure there's some of you kind of going back and go, oh my God, did I do all that? It's fine. My point is they're going to be fine. It's just that learning how to hold a pencil correctly, developing a healthy grip, it doesn't automatically happen. It has to be taught. Okay. As for what type of grips are the most functional, I would have to say the tripod grip. So let me show you. Here's my little pen. I'm going to do it with my left hand. I'm right-handed, but I'm going to do it with my left hand so you can probably see a little better. It looks similar to this. The pointer finger is on top, thumb right here, resting on the middle finger, and these two fingers are tucked in. There's a nice little O. This is a tripod grip. It's probably the most functional grip, right? The next would be what I call the quadrupod, which is basically two fingers on top, resting on the ring finger. Thumb is in the same position. Again, nice O right here. It just adds a little more stability. Those are typically the most functional, joint protective, and they lead to the least amount of pain or fatigue. But I mean, I have to be honest. I've seen a lot of funky grips out there. I mean, this one I see a lot. That's actually a really functional grip, especially when kids have some joint issues. So this one doesn't bother me, but I mean, oh my gosh, I've literally seen it all. And I've even seen this one. I mean, bless her heart. She literally two hands across the page. Okay. Here's the thing about grips. In a little bit, we're going to talk about, I hate using the word fix, but let's use the word fix for this, right? In a little bit, we're going to talk about how do we fix certain things. And I'm going to talk about how do we remediate grip in that part. But I do want to say this before we go further. Not all grips that look kind of awful and scary have to be corrected. You may have noticed, or maybe now you're going to start noticing, right? When an adult has a really awkward grip while writing, it almost looks painful, but they seem totally functional. This is the deal. If your child is older and has a really funky grip, but can write legibly, correctly, for the full extent of what needs to be written, they aren't complaining of pain in their hands, they aren't fatigued, I wouldn't mess with it. I wouldn't mess with it. You don't always have to correct the grip. The issue is when you've got a child that has a funky grip and they're in pain or fatigued, or what they write is really illegible. The reason we develop that awkward grip typically is because we don't have enough strength or we don't have enough coordination. So we adapt and compensate. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So understand when we talk about correcting it in a little bit, not every grip needs to be corrected, but every grip needs to be initially taught to avoid the issues later. And the other thing I will say is that when our babies are like in pre-K and kindergarten, you really want to focus on developing a healthy grip. If they don't develop one, then we might not notice that it interferes with their performance when they're really young. But once our kids get into first grade, second grade, everything just accelerates. And once you get into third, you might as well be strapped to a rocket, right? It is so fast. So the reason we do our best to teach it when they're young is because once the pace and the rigor of the class picks up, that's when you really start noticing how their grip affects their handwriting and how their handwriting affects their performance in class. So, I mean, I don't usually even hear from parents until kids are in about second grade, even though the problems actually started long before that. So it's important to work on it when they're young. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the third pillar, the third facet, which is often overlooked, but very, very important, is the physical setup and their gross motor skills. Now, if you've ever gone into your child's classroom, open house, everything is little. Desks are smaller, chairs are smaller, everything is very size appropriate, and that's intentional, right? You want your child to be able to sit in a chair where their feet are on the ground and the height of the desk hits them at their waist and their shoulder and their arm are down and everything's appropriately heighted. Now think about when they come home. Where do they do the majority of their work? They typically do it at the kitchen table. How they sit when they are writing has a direct effect on the result. When they sit at your table, let's just say if they're even sitting on their bottom in the first place, right? Their backs probably don't hit the back of the chair. Their feet don't hit the ground. It's a pretty unstable feeling. So oftentimes kids will sit on their knees or they'll like lean to one side or they're going to prop themselves up with their other hand, which they need for handwriting. That's their helper hand. Now, I'm not going to go tell you to go buy a small table and a small chair, and that's what they need for, that's what they need to do everything on. No. They got that at school. Okay. I get it. But I do recommend getting a little collapsible footstool and putting it under their feet. I know that kids don't like sitting in boosters because they're too cool for that, right? But if they're sitting at a table at home, you do want to prop them up on a firm cushion or a solid base and make sure there's something stable for their feet when they're working on their handwriting. I work in a lot of people's homes after school. I call it kitchen, it's my kitchen table setting. And I will say it really just takes a few inexpensive minor adjustments to make the physical setup and layout effective. Also, just a side note, if you have a really nice table that's like textured and it's got little holes in it, it's really pretty. It's not smooth. Just stick a folder underneath what they're working on, just so they have a nice smooth surface, because it is going to affect how they write. Okay. You also want to try to keep the environment where they're working free from or reduce the distractions. I know that sometimes that's easier said than done, especially if you have more than one kiddo, but you want to try to provide them an environment where they can really focus on what they're doing. Again, when we talk in a second about what are some things we can do to help with sitting balance or attention, I'll go over a few techniques. Okay, here we go. So now we know why handwriting is so important, right? How it affects learning and performance, that it has to be explicitly taught, including grip, and should be multisensory, age appropriate. But what happens when something goes wrong or everything has been modeled and taught and your child still has illegible or incorrect writing? What do we see? What does it look like? I don't have to tell you what you already know. When you look at your kiddo that their grip doesn't look right. You know when their hand hurts or they're struggling to sit comfortably. When their schoolwork looks like it doesn't take a handwriting specialist to see poor handwriting. If your child has reversals or the size is way too small or way too big, or if the size changes like letter by letter within the word, or like the size changes as it moves across the line, and that's if they're writing on the line, if they can't remember what the letter looks like, and so they switch out to the capital letter or like the lowercase letter within the word. When the words or the letters are written right on top of each other with like no spacing, or maybe it's just overall very sloppy and they just rush through it, or they get really frustrated and argue about even getting the work done. And you know when something doesn't look right and when your child is not feeling good. I don't want to spend a lot of time about what can go wrong, because chances are you wouldn't be here right now if you already didn't see the issue. What I want to do is spend time talking about what can we do to make it better. So I want to break this part down into two parts: services and resources, and then materials and techniques. So let's talk quickly about services first. What do you do when your child has issues with handwriting and you want them to get some help? First and foremost, talk to your child's teacher. I'm sure they see it, you see it, and you guys might be able to come up with a plan together. If you are in a public school, you might find handwriting help through the school. It can be a little complicated. Some schools only offer handwriting assistance if your child is eligible to receive occupational therapy services. And each state's a little different. Each district within that state's a little different. So oftentimes your child may only be eligible for handwriting services or occupational therapy if they have a primary diagnosis of like a medical condition or a learning disability that qualifies them for those additional services. So if your child has an IEP, they may qualify for handwriting once assessed, and your OT might be able to integrate that into their therapy time. If you have a child who does not qualify for occupational therapy services, they might qualify for dysgraphia services if your school has a dysgraphia program, but oftentimes the dysgraphia help is directly linked to the dyslexia program. So once again, it's hard because you have to qualify for the need, and yet so many kids have the need for handwriting help and don't really qualify. If you're in a private school, it really just depends on what your private school offers, and every school is a little different. As for private therapy, you can ask your pediatrician for an occupational therapy referral and get an evaluation and some treatment. The other option is private tutoring. That's what I do. I'm a private handwriting tutor, and there are many private handwriting tutors out there. And I have attached on that attachment is a list of resources, including where to find private tutoring in your area, starting with Dysgraphia Life, of course, first. They've got a great list of assistance in one of the links. If you can't find help in your area, you might find some tutors that do virtual or Zoom appointments. I mean, I personally do virtual tutoring because I found that there's just so many kids that need the help, and they don't live in close proximity to a handwriting specialist like me. But I always recommend talking to your school first. Talk to your child's teacher, let them know about your concerns, see what y'all can do together. The reality is, even with occupational therapy or dysgraphia treatment or private tutoring, it's still limited. Even with the tutoring, you're still going to need to do a lot of follow-up at home. And because of that, even with all of the resources or services available, I'm a huge believer in setting up what you can do as a parent at home to help your kids with handwriting. So let's talk about materials, techniques that can help with handwriting. So we've already talked about the general seating setup. You want to make sure that they're sitting at a table, feet on the ground, propped up enough where the table's at the right height for them. And you want to make sure that whatever they're sitting on is a fairly stable surface. There are several booster cushions on Amazon. That being said, I'm going to show you this air cushion. Can you see it? Super squishy. I use this a lot with kids who struggle with attention or ADHD or ADD. I find that when kids sit on this, they get the sensory input that they need for their body, and they're better able to focus on other tasks. You can tell which kids crave that sensory input, and others it's just way too much, right? But I love that air disc. You want to make sure it's a well-lit environment. I know that seems like common sense, but you want to make sure those lights are on. You want to make sure it's fairly calm, fairly quiet. Give them frequent breaks. Also, kids who struggle with sitting and attending to the task, they might respond well to larger gross motor activities or working on a vertical plane or working on the ground so they can weight bear on their arms and legs. If you have a child that struggles with attention, sometimes like giving them chewing gum or sour candy might help them focus on writing. There is no one solution or answer for working with attention. And you might have to try a lot of different things to see what works. These are just some examples, right? Okay, here we go. Now let's talk about grip. All right, now, first, when we talk about grip, we talked about how it has to be taught and modeled. So if you have an odd or funky grip and you're working with your child at home, you really need to try to show them what a proper functional grip looks like. And that could be tough. Trust me, from someone who had a funky grip till I started tutoring handwriting, it was tough. But you want to model for them what a healthy functional grip looks like. And we've also talked about not every grip has to be corrected. But if you do see that your child has a grip that looks uncomfortable or painful, or that their grip is part of the reason that they've got pretty illegible handwriting, it's okay to address and remediate it. So first, you want to provide your child opportunities to build up some fine motor skills, hand strength, coordination. I love activities that include like putty or Play-Doh. This is my putty. I like to put like little beads or little trinkets in there, and they have to like squish it around to pull out the little trinkets, or, you know, simply just working with the Play-Doh or rolling it, pinching it, shaping it into different shapes, whatever you want to do. Anything that gives your child an opportunity to really build up some fine motor strength and coordination is great. I like those little perler beads, making jewelry with beads, building Legos. Legos are fantastic, finger painting, and so on. I know that arts and crafts aren't always our kids' favorite things to do, especially for boys, but it's really important to give them as many fine motor activities as possible that will build strength and coordination. There are so many things you could do, and you know, you could spend hours online looking for fine motor activities. And that is part of the attachment to this webinar. I put a long list of things that you can do from home, and most of them are just things that you have around the house, right? But just know that fine motor activities are one of the things that they need to be working on for a healthy grip. Even with that and the strengthening, you might need to consider an external pencil grip or some sort of assistive device on their pencil that helps them form a correct grip. There are so many out there. I'm going to show you a couple that I have. I don't know if you can see, there's this one. I've got this one. I think you probably see this one more often. It just kind of helps them figure out where to put their fingers. Okay. This one always makes me giggle, but you know, some kids really need this one to respond well to it. It's got like a little cup where you put your fingers. That one, for me, that's like a sensory thing. I don't like it. Here's the thing. They all have the same purpose and they all have a little bit of merit. I like some more than others. It really just depends on what's going on with your child's grip. And I can't tell you what one you need, right? But I can tell you that there is a technique to help them hold a pencil correctly. And I found it extremely helpful. It's called the tip grip protocol. And it was established by an occupational therapist named Jan McCluskey. She's brilliant. I want to show it to you briefly because I feel like this benefits almost every child and every type of grip. So what you do is you take a small pencil or crayon and you either cut that pencil grip in half. This one's been cut in half, right? Or you can buy the little rounded ones like from Amazon. I personally like the rounded ones, and you slide it on your pencil. And then the most important part is you put a rubber band in front of it. Okay. So what happens is instead of your child holding onto a grip, your child's actually going to put their fingers around the ball and put the fingers on the rubber band. So my fingers are on the rubber band. And then I rest it and I tuck my fingers in. So this space becomes a nice O. You're not going to be able to have flat fingers. You're not going to be able to death grip this thing. It's going to help with pencil pressure. And by holding it, you also know where you're supposed to put your fingers on the pencil. Right there. I'm sure you've seen your kids holding it like way too low over the tip, like right down there. I don't even know if you can see my fingers. I see that a lot. It basically covers the pencil and then they can't even see what they're working on. I have rubber bands and grippy balls on so many pencils and crayons in my little kit. And I found it to be a really beneficial way of working on the grip without actually having to worry about using a grip. Here's the issue I have with grips. They're great, but every grip is different and every child is different. You could spend a fortune on figuring out what one works for y'all. And it's tricky to figure out which one is the best one. And unless you plan on using that grip indefinitely on every pencil and every crayon, you want to make sure that the grip is being used as a tool to help guide them, to help establish a healthy grip. It's not meant to be a permanent device that they use all the time, unless, of course, you have a child with a special need where that's appropriate. Okay. So for grip, we need to physically demonstrate, model a functional grip, introduce activities that build strength and coordination, and potentially use the different types of grips that might help with the formation, or use the tip grip protocol. Whatever you're doing, give them multiple opportunities to try different things on multiple surfaces with a variety of writing utensils. Don't just use workbooks or worksheets. Like put a piece, this is like crochet paper. I don't know if you can see it. There you go. Or sandpaper under a coloring page that maybe you've printed off from the internet. If they really love Pokemon, print out a picture of Pokemon and put it on top of this and let them color. It gives them so much feedback as possible when they're coloring with the correct grip. One of my absolute favorite things to do is whenever you're working on something, stick it on a vertical plane, stick it on the wall, get some painter's tape so you don't ruin your paint or your wallpaper, and stick that paper on the wall. It's just one of the best ways you can work on a child's posture and core strength and wrist extension and grip. It's multi-sensory, visually very different. It's great. I could probably spend a whole day just talking about grip with y'all. But by making these small adjustments, I think you're going to find a good response. What are some other materials that you can use at home to help with their handwriting? One of the things I really find beneficial for most kids is a slant board. Okay, you can buy, I'm going to show you a slant board. This is the one I have. I've had this one. I've also had a really thick binder that I just taped up. I mean, you do what you got to do, right? You can buy these on Amazon. When you were a kid in school, it's possible that you sat at a desk that had a slant to it. It wasn't flat. There was a reason for that. That slant helped with body position, produce better handwriting, better spacing. Today, most kids work on flat surfaces. And, oftentimes I find that when I'm working with kids, as soon as I put that slant board underneath their work, it sort of naturally corrects some of the issues just by positioning. So I love a good slant board. And again, you can buy those inexpensively online. When you work with your kids on handwriting, I always recommend having a letter chart. Here's my letter chart. It's just a printout of the letters. It helps with memory. It helps give them a visual representation of what the letter is supposed to look like, how to write it proportionately. And just a side note, if you have a left-handed child, just make sure that you place whatever letter charts or whatever worksheets or whatever you're working on, place it to the right so that they can see it. Oftentimes when if you have a left-handed child, or if you're left-handed and you have that like hook, I used to call them my hookers. And then I was like, oh, that's horrible. I can't do that. Right. But if you've got that hook or you've seen that hook, oftentimes it happens because they can't see what they're writing. And so by hooking that wrist, they can actually still see in between. So if you put all the materials to the right, it gives them an opportunity to see without blocking it with their hands. Okay. When learning how to write the letters, I like going from gross motor to fine motor, large muscle movements to small muscle movements. Pretty much anytime I work with a kiddo and they're struggling with a letter, I always give them big things to work on. And then we move down to small writing. I like to build letters with like wood pieces. I've got these fun little magnet pieces so they can actually build the letter. I like to use shaving cream on a cookie tray. Or I'll fill like a gallon size Ziploc bag with hair gel and I'll lay it flat and then they can kind of write the letters in the hair gel. I come up with all kinds of things, right? I like working on a chalk, on the sidewalk with chalk, they're weight bearing on the ground. Or I'll put a poster board up on the wall and then they can write letters and markers or colors on that. Sometimes even just air writing, right? Like just write the letters with your hands, capital letter D, right? Okay, once you practice the gross motor letters, then we move on to the fine motor letter practice. My absolute favorite method favorite for teaching and tutoring handwriting is called the wet, dry, try method from Handwriting Without Tears. There's videos online, and I think there's even an app, but I'm not an app person, right? But basically it's a small chalkboard right here. You write the letter that you're going to model. So this is a capital letter D. So they already see the visual model, right? I'm going to show you how to do this because you can get a chalkboard on Amazon or Walmart or whatever. I don't really care. Okay. So what they do is they squeeze out the teeniest little sponge. And if you notice, my hands have to be in that little pincher grasp when it's, again, small tools makes a better grip. They start at the top, big line down, jump, and then they do the curve. All right. So now they've erased it, although, whatever. Then they take a small piece of paper, crumble it up in one hand, really, really tight and tiny. Again, see the grip? Big line down, jump, big curve. So you still see the letter. And then with the chalk, which for some reason, there it is, then they write it themselves. Jump, big curve. That's wet, dry, try in a nutshell. Okay. What I love about it is it just checks all the boxes. It gives them a visual model. It gives them multiple opportunities to practice the same letter in the correct sequence. And it gives them a lot of sensory feedback. And once they master how to write the letters in chalk, then I move on to paper. So let's talk about paper for a minute. I've seen 2-line paper. I've seen 3-line paper. I've seen 4-line paper. I've seen paper where there's multiple colors for each line. I've seen raised line paper. I feel like I've seen it all. I have paper that looks like a grid. I have paper that has little spacers in between each letter for your kids. I mean, there are so many types of paper. And at the end of the day, they're going to be using notebook paper in school, right? So much like grips that we give to use our kids, all of that line paper is used to do the same thing, which is to teach our kids how to write letters with proportionate sizing on the line. That's it. It doesn't matter if it's 2 lines or 10 lines. It's meant to teach them how to write letters correctly in terms of size and how straight they are. So when they move to like notebook paper, they know what they're doing. All of that line paper is just a teaching tool, just a training tool. Now, what I find interesting is a lot of kids' worksheets don't actually have lines on them. They may have, they have like those big squares where they can write what they want. Well, if you've got a kid that struggles with handwriting or writing letters in a straight line proportionately, if there's no guidelines, it's really, really tough. So one of the things you could do as a parent is, again, first talk to your teacher and let them know that your kid's struggling without those lines. Is it possible for the teacher to maybe write something? Or, what can you do at home to help? One of my favorite things, I'm going to show you this. I found this on Amazon a while ago. It's these stamps. Oh my gosh, I think they're really cool. So it's just like a little baby stamp, looks like a highlighter, and they just like write the line across the page. I didn't do that straight because I'm up in the air. But I just think they're really cool. And these are small. They can fit into a backpack. I'm going to show you this one. See? It's just really cool. They fit in a backpack. It's something easy that the kids can do. And maybe, again, with permission from the teacher, just give them something that they can put some structure down. That's what's really important. When you're talking about math, I'm a huge fan of graph paper because, again, they need structure and they need guidance to line them up. Graph paper can be found. This is a much larger format. You can make it at home if you wanted to. You can, again, order that online. I don't know how much, like $5 for the pad or something. But by giving them some structure, some guidance, they can write their numbers a little more clearly. I do want to talk about spacing. I know that spacing is a real issue for a lot of kids who have handwriting difficulties. I've seen a lot of kids use their finger to space between the words. I'm just not a fan of that. I mean, it's just not my thing. I realize that teachers tend to like it because kids always have their other finger, right? Like they can't lose the finger. But here's the thing. We don't want them taking their hand off the page to space because they need to be holding the paper. That's part of that sitting posture that we talked about. And they need that helper hand. They block what they're seeing. It's just, I'm not a fan. I'm never going to be a fan. And that is incredibly difficult if you're a left-handed kid because you're writing and then you've got your finger spacer and you got to write over it. It doesn't work for them. So, I like tongue depressors, popsicle sticks, cute little spacing sticks. You can buy them online. They're great because you just slide them across the page real quick, just a quick movement and you put your hand back. They're cheap. If you lose one, you can throw them away. I actually don't have any in my house because I keep forgetting to buy more. So I just cut, there it is, index card, cut it into a strip. That's what I do. It works. So you don't need to spend a lot of money on this stuff. You just need to make sure it's as functional as possible. And verbal cues are free. Just giving them a cue to say, okay, leave a space, or even a sound like shh in between each word. Sometimes that's all kids need. Now, I do know that a lot of kids who struggle with dyslexia and reading can also tend to struggle with spacing. And it can be very difficult to correct spacing when tied to reading. The slant board can be very helpful, as do verbal cues, spacing tools. But what I found to be the most successful tool is cursive writing. I know that a lot of kids don't learn cursive anymore. I know that when they do, they aren't required to use it afterwards. I love cursive. It's my favorite thing about writing. I love teaching it. I do camps during the summer where kids learn it in 5 days. It could be so simple and so helpful. It's just a fast, efficient way to write. Kids learn a new skill from scratch. They learn how to connect letters and space words naturally because of cursive. So I do recommend looking into a cursive program. I have my own personal favorites, but if you find something that works for y'all, go for it. And there's general things that all kids benefit from, right? Slant boards, smaller crayons, a stable place to sit, give them a visual representation, lots of verbal cues. But at the end of the day, it's going to require you to be engaged in what they're doing. You're going to have to sit with them and watch what they're doing, because if they're doing the writing in the grip and it's incorrect, you're just helping them sort of reinforce the bad habit, right? And I know that's not what we want to do. So you have to engage in what they're doing so that they create the new healthy habit and not reinforce the bad one. And I just want to say one last thing, because I know we want to leave time for questions. And I know this was a lot of information and it is very overwhelming. And like I said, I could spend days talking about all of these things, but just know that if you have a child that is struggling with handwriting and you've done the things, right? We've worked on grip, we've worked on instruction, we've done the sensory tools, we've done all of this, and they're still struggling. Look into assistive technology, right? There is a lot out there for parents. The schools are usually very supportive. There's talk to text. There's lots of different programs. There are keyboarding programs that teach kids even how to type better. Look into it, because at the end of the day, what we want our kids to do is have a love of learning and very functional, productive work. And there's zero shame in saying the writing's not happening, right? We need to move to assistive technology. Okay. Woo, a lot of stuff. I want to finish by just saying thank you so much for being here with me tonight. I know it's a lot. I know that as parents, we worry about our kids, especially when it comes to handwriting. Use the resources I gave you. Feel free to email and whatever we can do to kind of help you on this journey. That's what we're here to do. And for this, I defer back to Jennifer for questions.
We have lots of questions.
I bet.
Everybody was very excited, and there's we have some big picture questions and also some kind of specific questions about the resources. So everyone, while we're answering questions, I'm going to put a quick survey in the chat so that Heather and I can get some feedback on how you all like today's session. So please, it's one page. If you can fill it out, that would be fabulous. And we will be able to use that feedback for future planning. But I'm going to start with kind of a big picture. A few people asked about, what resources do you like best, which then you into quite a bit. But there were a couple specific questions about curricula, handwriting curriculums, both print and cursive. We saw different forms of the question, but I know Dysgraphia Life does not usually recommend a specific one. However, that because there are a lot that are good. Do you have ones that you think are particularly good that people should check out? Are there a couple to consider? And is there a difference between print and cursive?
I'm going to be real honest and say I am a huge fan of Handwriting Without Tears. I wish I got a cut every time I said their name, right? I don't. And the reason why is, being from an occupational therapy background, to me, it's the most functional for kids. It really highlights their skills and their way of learning. And it tackles it from all these different approaches. I have yet to see one that I'm in love with as much. Just to be honest, it's through Learning Without Tears now, because they have a much larger, robust program that integrates reading and phonics. And so you can Google Handwriting Without Tears or Learning Without Tears. A lot of schools still use Danielian for cursive, Zane or Bloser. I like Handwriting Without Tears. I really love their cursive program. A print program, there's a lot out there that are great. There really are. I couldn't even off the top of my head think of some of them. There's so many. But the cursive program, hands down, is the best one I've ever seen. It really works progressively, logically, simply, and it's very user friendly for parents. You don't have to. I do feel like some of the curriculum I look at, I feel like I have to have a PhD. I mean, I'm not an educator, I'm not a teacher, and I recognize that. So to me, from a therapy background and a parent, I just like how it's done. I just think they know what they're doing, and they're doing it. They're doing it well. I mean, that's what I would recommend.
Sounds good. And we heard from parents of different ages, a couple of forms of that question as kids get older.
Mhm.
Is there an age at which you stop teaching handwriting? At what age, is there if you have a child who might be, we heard 12, fifth grade, some of the older kids, should you still try to get them to switch to cursive, or should you still try to work on their handwriting? What is your take on sort of what age you might switch all
Right.
over to assistive technology versus continue to focus on handwriting skills?
Right. You know, I feel like everyone should have, to me, it's a life skill. Being able to write is a life skill, right? Like driving and cooking, you need to be able to write. So if you have a child who has difficult handwriting, like, or whatever the issues are, I don't feel like something that you just kind of, throw by the wayside. They will most likely, if you've got an elementary school child, by the time they're in middle school, they're most likely going to be fully on that laptop. But they still have to write. So to me, if you've got a kid in fifth grade, middle school that's struggling with print, just switch to cursive. But they have to, in order for them to integrate it, they have to practice. It doesn't matter what you do. If you do print or cursive, it has to be something they practice, else they're never going to use it. But cursive is so much easier for most people to write. Most adults use some blend of cursive and print, right? Like you'll write a few letters in cursive and then like one print letter, because it's efficient and fast. And if you've got a child in school right now, either elementary or middle school or even high school, and they intend to go on to higher education, or even vocational school, there's still going to be a need to write. So I'm a fan and always doing it. I actually just worked with a lawyer. I'm not even kidding, recently, because he was so upset that his handwriting was so bad. So he was like, could you just spend some time working with me? I'm like, okay. I mean, I don't think it's ever time to give up. I do think though, if you're focused so solely on handwriting and they're not getting the content out and they're falling behind, switch to technology to get the work out, and then work on the handwriting on the side to supplement or support it.
Makes sense. We heard a few questions about qualification for the OT within schools or without of schools. Do you recommend sort of OT assessments at this point? I know we talk about neuropsych testing for some of the broader cognitive spelling related issues.
Yeah.
Any advice to parents who are struggling with assessment?
I know. I mean, I wish I had better answer for that, because I think the reality is you can go to the counselor, you can ask for testing. And if it's just handwriting, which oftentimes it's never just handwriting, let's face it, right? There's always maybe a little something like it's their hand coordination or whatever. But like I said, there's so many kids right now that didn't get the instruction they needed during that time. And then once they hit those grades, they were expected to know how to write. So their handwriting looks horrible, but they might not have kind of gotten what they needed. It's just really hard. It's just really hard to get your kid the services they need when there's not something underlying. But I say ask, absolutely ask, because your school may have a lot of support. There are some districts that are barely keeping the lights on. So it really just depends on where you're at and what you can get. But I say go for it. Ask for as much as you can get. The worst they can do is say no. And then you're going to have to figure out how to help your kid outside of that.
Sounds good. A couple small specific questions on things you showed. Your wet, dry, try chalkboard. How big was that? And do you recommend using it like you sort of use the vertical edge for your long letter? Is that how you typically teach them? And how big is it?
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So this is like a 5x7. Yeah, I think it's 5x7. I don't have a ruler. Like ish 5x7. There's my hand. This happens to be Handwriting Without Tears because I have so much of their stuff. But like I said, you can find anything. What's neat is, I don't know if you could tell, it does have like a lip. So it forces the kids to stop. And you use the line to guide you. If you go to their website, they will have a video demonstration of people showing you how to use this. You use the small for capital letters and numbers. And then they have a double line version, which I don't have. I just made my own for lowercase letters. But slate and chalk, my best friend.
And a couple questions on the tip grip too. Where did you get that? How did you put that together? Where can people get a grip like that?
Yes. So, okay, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not a tech savvy person. So I'm trying to put everything on an Amazon storefront for everyone so they can just go, oh, that's what it is, and click. My child is in college and is coming home this weekend to figure out how to do that for his mama.
We have stuff on our resources page too, so we can link it in if we
thank you. Okay. It doesn't matter. You can just get a grip and cut it in half, any grip, and cut it in half. This was the one I had. That I bought on Amazon. I just looked round grips and found something, but the product or the program is called the Tip Grip Protocol. And you can find it. It is on that resources page that I sent to y'all.
Okay.
It's from the handwritingclinic.org, I think. But if you just Google Tip Grip Protocol, it should pop up, and it will give you an explanation of sort of how this works and why. I just think this is brilliant. I've even used that Crayola air foam, that air clay that dries. I've even made my own out of that, just because I was like, I had it, my kids stopped using it. I made those little balls out of that, stuck it on a pencil.
Sounds great. And we're running out of time. I'll do one more question for everybody. I do want to make one somewhat unrelated plea, which is Dysgraphia Life's doing a lot of stuff in this area. And one of the things we're doing under our research study right now is a parent guardian engagement survey to understand how parents are learning information about learning disabilities for their kids. So I'm going to put that link in the chat for everyone. If you are a parent or guardian, a student with dysgraphia, with any type of learning disability, please consider filling that out. It does take about 15 minutes, but we would greatly appreciate it. And so we will stick that in the chat, and we want to thank everybody for coming tonight. We're going to end on one that I think a lot of people are struggling with, especially in the COVID era, which is the link between ADHD and dysgraphia and handwriting. One person asked how common that was. Others weighed in and said, yes, it's really common. There is a link there. We do see that a lot as well when we look at surveys. How do you handle that? What are your best tips for approaching students who may have handwriting difficulties, but also attention-related difficulties?
It's tough. And whoever asked if this is common, the majority of the kids I see, honestly, have ADHD. A lot of the kids I see are gifted. They're highly exceptional learners and have attention, right? It's so common, which is why I would say you're not alone in this. This is a real issue with COVID pausing their education and having to catch up. Also, again, I see kids after school. So if you have a kid who is on any kind of ADHD medication, chances are it's starting to wear off after school, or they've been in school all day long. Again, I really like to do, when I'm working with kids who I know struggle with attention, in addition to having the right kind of setup, right? I really like to get them physically moving, doing things, because I want them to be able to write on paper, but I want to make sure that whatever they're writing is correct. So like I said, I will get them on the ground with a poster board and have them write letters on a poster board. I will, do it on a wall. I love working on a wall. Just don't let them mess up your wall. But anything that gets their whole body engaged, anything that's multi-sensory, they feel something, they're likely to be more engaged in what you're doing, because it's not fine motor paperwork. Once you do it and you go, okay, they're writing that D correctly. They're making that G correctly. They're spacing it pretty well on the wall or on the ground or in the hair gel or in the shaving cream. They've gotten that feedback. Then I move to paper, but the paper activity is usually at the very end, and it's very quick. You do that enough, right? You're using a lot of paper time or desk time, but it doesn't feel like it because they've spent the majority of their time moving and feeling and taking everything in. I find that kids, for me at least, they attend a little bit better when they're not forced to sit for 15 minutes. They do that all day. They need to move their bodies. To me, that's where I find the best results, but it's tricky, and I get it. And it's tough. It's a really tough time for these kids and mom and dad.
Thank you so much. We're getting a lot of positive comments in the chat about how much everyone appreciates this. We really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
The recording will be available in 7 days. It'll get automatically sent to everyone who registered via Zoom. So look out for that. We will also, on that same page that we've been putting in the chat that has the resources and the agenda right now, we will also post a link to it on that page, and we will try our best to pull as many of the resources that we saw tonight and put links to that too, so you can find everything. Thank you to everyone for coming out, and thank you so much to Heather York for a fabulous presentation tonight. We really appreciate all that practical advice.
You're so welcome.